Okay. Hello, Peter. How are you doing?
Hello. Hi, Joseph. I'm doing well.
Well, as you probably gathered from that wonderful title and that old-timey music there, that this episode of the Oddfellows Oddcast is about tips for a new Noble Grand. So let's say that you happen to bump into somebody who says, "Yeah, I got elected to Noble Grand, and I sure could use a few tips." So this is a show for those people.
Excellent.
So, yeah. Now, you've got ideas. You're very deeply experienced, many more years experience than I have. And I'm at like 1.5 years now as Noble Grand because of COVID. They extended me, so I got a little more experience than I had bargained for the first year. But I have come up with some tips, and just I also tapped into the community at Heart and Hand Online. I just threw out a question. Hey, if you've got any tips for a new Noble Grand, what would they be? So I kind of got some of those tips, but I sort of worded them a little differently. So I'm going to throw up that first tip for a new Noble Grand, and you tell me what you think of it. And if I'm missing anything, they may appear later, but let me know what you think of them. And then at the end, if there's one that I missed, it's like obvious as the nose on my face, then you can definitely chime in and say, "Hey, you missed this one."
Okay, I'll
So
wait. I'll wait until that.
try.
I'll try my best not to spill it all.
Okay, so here's the first tip. All right, so run an organized meeting. Know the ritual, no surprises. Is that a pretty good one?
That's a good one. And as I told you before you started this, I made a quick list
Hmm.
when I knew what the topic would be about, and as I told you, that's know the ritual and the code. So
Hmm.
so knowing the ritual is paramount. Do you want me to elaborate why you need to
Sure.
know the ritual?
Yes. Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
there are little tricks and there are advantages for the Noble Grand to run a meeting. And it's not only just the order of business and knowing that you can mix up the order of business, and that's a big advantage if you knowing the ritual. And also, I think we even talked about installing officers one time. In back of the ritual, it says a qualified past grand can install the officers of a lodge, install a lodge. So
Hmm.
a Noble Grand should be able to pick up on that stuff right away. It doesn't take a very long time to learn the ritual. Really, have it in front of you and learn. If you read this fine print, you'll have a big advantage over everyone else, even the more experienced members in the
Hmm.
order, if you
Yeah.
just read the fine print.
Yeah. Now, there in California, we have a couple additional resources to pull from as a Noble Grand, as well as the ritual and as well as the Sovereign Grand Lodge Code and also California Code, Robert's Rules. We actually have a couple of booklets that expand on some of the things that are things that a Noble Grand should know, and also that. So, depending on your jurisdiction, there may be additional resources. So I'm going to dovetail on to what you said about knowing the code, but also know your state or jurisdiction's rules, because they don't, they're not the same from state to state. Like, for example, if somebody asks a Noble Grand, "Hey, if somebody wanted to join our lodge and they're 16, can they do it?" Right. So in our California code, that's okay. In other
Yeah.
states or other
I wrote,
jurisdictions, it's not.
I
You were
wrote,
the one that wrote that.
yeah, I wrote that to allow us to bring 16-year-olds into our Odd Fellows Lodge. I
Right.
also wrote the one that allowed us to accept to do all the degrees in one day too.
Hmm.
So, just knowing your codes too. But the ritual, you have a lot of leeway in the ritual as a Noble Grand if you just do it. it I'm not going to criticize any Noble Grand because, sometimes depending on the lodge, it can be difficult too. You may have an older member there just insisting he knows the entire thing, but he's wrong the entire time, and you wouldn't know it if you didn't
Right.
open the ritual. And I see that happen.
Yeah, I know that,
Thanks.
there's a lot of times whenever over the years I have asked you, said, "Hey, can I do this? Can I do that?"
My
And you
answer
have
is
told me,
mostly yes.
look in the code, right? But yes, but obviously, if I knew where it was, I would have the answer. And so you have helped to guide me to learn how to do that. And so I have answers to questions that have come up a couple times. Can a Noble Grand, vote? Things like that. So we have a book that says for our jurisdiction that no, Noble Grand doesn't vote unless it's like a casting a deciding vote. Yeah.
But you can ballot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So things like that. If you don't know those things and you're the Noble Grand, well, you might look like you're not really reading up. So definitely, know your code, know your ritual. That way there's no surprises. So we'll go on to the next tip, which is one of my favorite ones. So maintain decorum. All conversations go through the Noble Grand. So
Absolutely.
I have personally heard people complaining about how it is that in their lodges, everybody, they're all talking to each other. There's a lot of crosstalk. And I remind people, because this is something that I learned from our secretary, who's been in Oddfellows for many, many years, that everything is supposed to go through the Noble Grand. Anytime anybody's got a question or anything, they're supposed to say Noble Grand and, be recognized, and then they can speak. And if you don't stick to that, then you end up with a lot of crosstalk. What do you think about this particular tip? You got any good stories on this one?
I actually do. Not a long one, but it can get really out of control if the Noble Grand, if everything did not go through the Noble Grand. And hopefully we elaborate. I have something on my list, and I'm going to wait and see if it comes up in your list. But being the Noble Grand, everything has to go through the Noble Grand. You can't have side conversations and people addressing the right supporter or the secretary. Sometimes you'll see conversations going on, and that can turn that decorum and all conversation. If it doesn't happen that way, you can turn a 45-minute meeting. Because really, if you're handling everything in committees or discussing it in a social before your meeting, like our lodge does, Yerba Buena, or if you don't do all that beforehand, you can turn a 45-minute meeting into a 2 to 3 hour meeting. And once those meetings get that long, and depending what type of lodge you have, you may never come back as a member. I would hate to sit through a meeting more than an hour. I would hate it. But I get all my pleasure doing the committees, but directing it all through the Noble Grand, and there's little tricks how the Noble Grand can handle that. Hopefully it comes up, but yeah, that I totally agree with that. And my lodge is a little bit lazy on that, though. We'll allow some floor conversations, but if we know a visitor's coming, or what we call in our order a dignitary, we will tighten up, and that side conversation will all stop. I mean, we know enough. We have enough experienced members in Yerba Buena, but yes, all your anything has to be directed through that Noble Grand.
Yeah, Noble Grand's sort of like a traffic cop in a way,
That's
directing people, directing the conversations to the right parties. And speaking of which, whenever we have these wonderful, long conversations that happen, it brings up the next tip here, which is to keep all discussions brief. And that is if the Vice Grand doesn't do it, because as we know, the Vice Grand is supposed to be keeping an eye on the time to make sure that we don't spend too much time on something, and can rep their gavel if the Noble Grand isn't really noticing that things are running a little long, right?
And the right supporter too.
Right supporter too.
So yeah, things can, like we just discussed, can get out of control and just keep going and on and on and on and on. And if you find that going on, do like your Grand Lodges do, and even Sovereign Grand Lodge. You can limit your discussion. If you have a lodge that just goes on and has a lot of issues, and you realize that it can consume all your time. Remember, we talked about a Noble Grand, and number one, being able to change up the order of business. There's strategies for that. So if you had an issue in your lodge, discussions can go on and on and on, and you have to set limitations as a noble grand, and you can do that as a noble grand, but you
Right.
need to do it on the onset.
Hmm.
So it gives everybody a fair chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
agree. Yeah.
yeah. Now the other one, the next tip, number 4, support and guide conversations toward motions. Because the discussions that follows the motion, and that kind of dovetails into the next one, which is about how it is that whenever you have that discussion, bring it to a vote as quickly as you can, because every single person can give their side of a particular motion, but it may not really be necessary. So this tip is, support and guide the conversation rather than, because I know that there are some people that I have heard that have complained that their noble grand's a bit heavy-handed. And, I think it's really essential for a noble grand to have a bit of a levity, little sense of humor, not too heavy-handed, because you need to get business done, but at the same time, you got to recognize everybody's a volunteer. This isn't work. It isn't like a workplace where somebody has to come down on other people. We don't want that in our lodges at all. And some people may, think that's the only way to get things done, and that would be a mistake. So what do you think about making sure that we guide, like a noble grand guides and supports the conversations, draws out the conversation as necessary from somebody? Somebody may start talking and not really articulate what it is that they are trying to say, and the noble grand can help them.
Noble grand can assist there, but I like your part in the parentheses there, because that's the way a meeting needs to be run, unless you're under good of the order.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even talk unless emotion's on the floor. That's really the way it's supposed to operate, and we could talk about that. I'm still waiting to see something that's related to this.
Mm-hmm.
But the part you have in the parentheses is just the way meetings should be held. You only discuss on discussion. You
Right.
can't have a long what we see happen quite a bit in the lodges. And it's unfair, really. You'll see somebody, and you hear see an older, younger member, doesn't matter who it is. They'll start talking about a great idea. Oh, it's a great idea. We had a wine festival down there. We had a booth at the wine festival. It's making a lot of money. And I was thinking, if we do X, Y, and Z, we can actually make $12 an hour from so-and-so.
Mm-hmm.
If you start to, I want to find a way to do that. Well, you've laid it all out. I want to move. I want to make a motion, or something like that. Somebody doesn't understand. I want to do that. Well, you've already given your entire discussion on your topic, and it just really lends everything out. And then you'll have everybody ready to talk, and it's just not the way to do business. A person should just, even if the rest of the group doesn't know what the topic's about, the motion needs to come on the floor first. This is why social gatherings before the meetings are so important. Those backroom discussions over refreshments. We do our refreshments before our meetings, so we kind of know everything that's going to come up, and we got a feel for what's going to pass or not, and we it's just a way to do business, and it'll really help the noble grand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of times people try to put their talking points into their motion, and it's like, that's
you have these long motions, and your secretary's can you repeat that motion?
Yeah.
You can't even repeat it because you were hoping somebody is writing all your points down, and
Right.
It's just do a simple motion.
And that kind of, speaking of a simple motion, that comes to the next tip here, which is bring a motion to a vote swiftly and deftly. That means like gracefully and quickly. Brevity is the soul of wit. Another way of saying that is, people aren't going to have a whole lot of fun if we really drag these things out. So yes.
Unfortunately, when it is a serious topic, even at Grand Lodge on the floor, we're not like other jurisdictions so much here in California, where some actually follow the model of the Sovereign Grand Lodge Code and go along with the committee assigned and vote in that direction. But here in California, at a Grand Lodge, we can have a debate with 10 people lined up with heated discussion. Nobody really crosses the line. It's come close, but swiftly, the only way, we just touched upon this, the only way this can come up, the Grand Master or the Noble Grand in this case, can make this thing come along fairly if he wants to, or he or she wants to do, or they want to do this quickly, is to set a time, to set a time limit for discussion. In fact, it's codified at the Grand Lodge. It's codified at the Sovereign Grand Lodge. Speaker of a legislation, a bill gets to speak for 5 minutes. It's sovereign. Who needs that kind of time? But I think at Grand Lodge, we've set it for 3 minutes. So setting time limits, being a good Noble Grand, you'll know if the item will be heated, or if it'll be hotly discussed, debated. You'll know that. You should know that, and set a time limit. You don't have to. I would do that just normally if you have that kind of legislation, or motions coming to the floor.
Yeah, and as Noble Grand, you can say, discussion is limited to 2 minutes. Per person.
Do that.
And that's something that is within your rights as Noble Grand. If you know it is going to be like a contentious, long-winded kind of thing, you can tell people, 2 minutes. And then that hopefully the Vice Grand will pick up on that, look at their watch and go, okay, I'm going to pay attention to this and wrap the gavel if it gets to be, 2 minutes. So, yeah. Now, that brings me to the next tip, which is a good way of making sure that there isn't too much time being spent during Lodge. And that is tip number 6, encouraging members to bring their matters to committees between sessions. And like you were saying, a lot of your business is discussed immediately before your Lodge session over refreshments. And I think that that's really great. And between what I like to do in our Lodge is try to get some of the building committee matters sorted out before the Lodge session, so that when the building committee does their report, they have a motion and it's already been discussed. It's already been picked apart, and anybody who is really interested in it has an opportunity for input.
It's, each lodge has different types of committees, and in my lodge, we don't control the building, but we so we don't have that type of committee. I know in Davis they have like 55 committees.
I know, a lot.
For me, that would be a nightmare. What we did in our lodge here, but when I hate to refer, I use my lodge as a model because it seems to work. Listen. Whatever works best for a lodge, do it. I'm not telling you my way is the best way. I'm not telling you we're the right way. It just works for us. What we do is we have the finance committee because that's required by code,
right? And
in our ritual, it's required. And it's we have the entire lodge is the membership committee, so we all are actively involved. And then what we did with, instead of having all these committees, we put it what we call our event committee, because we're a lodge about activities, and once a month we do an outing. So normally a lodge would have a committee for each outing, so you could have 20 committees going, but what we do is we have one event committee, and it's been doing it so long, and we invite a new member each year or two, whatever the Noble Grand wants to put in there, to join the committee, and the committees handle all our events. So we have basically 3 committees, and everything comes in those socials, those 3 committees, and it's so easy. Everything is so streamlined. Committees are so important if you can get that. It's related to that social discussion before the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also kind of dovetails into the next one too, which is tip number 7. As Noble Grand, you should read the room. You should be aware of what is not working. Generally, and if you go down the street, you say to somebody, "Hey, I'm going to give you a coupon for a cup of coffee if you tell me Do you like meetings? And people will go, no. You know,
And Oddfellow meetings are so boring if you just followed the rich. I mean, they can be so boring. I mean, I've
can
been
be,
doing
yes.
this for decades, and
Mhm.
I'm telling you, I mean, from the first time I sat in a business, like, I'm going to quit this order. They're so boring. You have to really have a social with it. If all you
Yeah.
had was a meeting, you know, just have the social, meet in the room. The Noble Grand should have the best feel. We support our Noble Grands in our off, and we always, even members like me who've been around and been this and that, even, and you could tell, I know Leroy's in your lodge, but
Mhm.
we'll sit back and we will demand that the lodge follow the Noble Grand. The Noble Grand runs that meeting. So if the Noble Grand said, hey, Peter, I need you to go out there and do this. Can you do it? Yeah, absolutely. There's no hesitation. Even if I disagreed, I'd still follow the Noble Grand. And it goes back to those first points. The
Mhm.
Noble Grand runs the lodge.
Mhm.
Okay. But I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you how they do it in a minute. If I don't see it come up here.
Okay. And I probably didn't include it if I already hadn't said it, but I've got 3 more tips. And the next one is really kind of what I have learned over the years about Oddfellows, and that is I have educated myself. So that the tip is, remember that education can solve just about any problem. And just like you were talking about knowing the ritual, knowing the code, I consider those things to be education. And also, too, knowing the history is a really important thing. Understanding why we don't have alcohol during lodge sessions. Understanding why we don't talk about
You don't?
uh,
No.
understanding why we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion during sessions. So if you have an appreciation and understanding for why those things are in place, because of our history, because of our code, why the codes are written the way that they're written, uh, then it helps to give people a context for why things are the way they are. A lot of times people will say, well, I don't like that. And if you're able to give them an understanding of why it is the way that it is, it's much better than just telling them something like, well, I'm the Noble Grand, I said so. That's the worst answer that you can give. You really need to be able to give people, um, I don't want to say an educated answer, but and demonstrated an understanding of why the code is the way that it is. Would you agree with that?
But you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I'm sitting here. I didn't think of that point, and it's right on it. Uh, it it's kind of related. I watched this Grand Master once, and that's knowing the history of it, being able to respond if you need to as a Noble Grand. Why the why?
Hmm.
Answer the why instead of it's in the code.
Hmm.
Well, it's in the code because we have to wear regalia. We have to pay our dues. Do you know why? Because the IRS requires it. It's actually verbiage. That verbiage with regalia and
Hmm.
ritualistic rituals. Those words are used in the IRS code defining a 501c8,
Hmm.
defining what we are. So we have to follow those guidelines. Now that's the why for that
Hmm.
one. But I
Hmm.
watched the Grand Master once, and I wouldn't know how to answer it, but I watched him debate the opening of a session with someone who wore a hat indoors.
Hmm.
The person refused to take it off, and it was a debate between him and this person for 45 minutes. And every now and
Wow.
then someone would try to interject. This about 6 or 7 years ago, and
Huh.
it would just be this battle back and forth, and everyone was just entertained by it. I think there are 200 and something representatives.
Huh.
California's big,
Yeah.
and we're all sitting there, all experienced people. And we're all sitting there, we coat and ties, and we're all watching this debate back and forth, and how it was resolved. It wasn't necessarily a how,
Hmm.
knowing why. I mean, why it's a tradition to take off your hat indoors, and I mean, how would you handle that as a leader if someone in your lodge refused to take off their hat? You know,
I think that's a good
but
question. You want to know if I can just interject. What I would probably say offhand. We have in our lodges. It has been authorized that we can wear fezzes. So
Okay.
I wouldn't particularly see an issue with it.
I don't see with the feds, but I never had a problem when I became Grand. I'll tell you how they resolved that in a minute.
Okay.
When I became Grand Master, I didn't. If you wanted to dress the way you needed to dress to come, if that was the only thing keeping you from coming to session because you didn't own a coat and tie,
Mm-hmm.
no way. You come to session. If you wanted to wear your hat, I didn't have a problem. I didn't have a problem with anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we had so many people. That's why we had. Uh, that wasn't the gist of the order to me. The gist of the purpose of the order is to get as many people there as possible,
Sure.
to share as much information as possible. And I didn't have a problem in my year, or at least if I did, I handled it right away. I didn't shy away from them. But the way they did, this Grand Master, which is, we're talking noble grands, but this might help a noble grand.
It's similar.
Somebody stood up and they said, well, I have a suggestion for those who want to wear hats starting tomorrow. Come on in, and everyone, let's put $5 toward the youth for a person who wants to wear a hat. The next day, over 100 people wore a hat.
Oh, nice.
And the warden and the person, they collected $5 for each person. They raised $500. In a matter of minutes with the marshal and the warden or the officers. I forget what appointed officers, but they went around, they collected all the money. And each day that happened, the following year, that became a ritual for our Grand Lodge. And I think they still do it. Did they do it 2 years ago? I can't remember, but wearing hats is permissible in our session as long as you pay to do it. And if you're not really paying, then you're not really, then there's a problem. But everybody, even the person with the hat gave $10, and he loves to wear his hat, but he paid. It was that important to him. But during that time, that 45 argument, you had at least 20 members put their hats back on because the Grand Master, this is the way he responded, because I said so. And that was when he said that, he lost the argument. Unfortunately, that one smart brother came up, or member came up and suggested the $5 donation, and it resolved it. Everyone was happy, and the youth made money. Or whatever cause it has been since that time. So the noble grand, by knowing, rather than saying that's what the code says, that's what I say, have something behind it and have some creative thought.
Yeah, it was probably Leroy Scolari who was there who said that.
No, it's actually you want me? I'll give him credit. It's Gene Breland.
Okay.
Gene Breland. Past Grand Master.
All right. Well, he certainly deserves a credit for that. That I would imagine that it's certainly a bit of a magical thing to be able to transform adversity into something positive. So my hat's off to him.
I won't tell you who the Grand Master was, because he said he said so, but I won't tell you him.
Okay. We'll talk about it afterwards. Okay. Okay, so that then leads us to our 9th tip that I whipped up today, which is that tip number 9, if you're not sure about something, table it until you can research. Now, I'm a little guilty sometimes of not knowing exactly what it is, but giving it my best in terms of making a decision on the spot. But that's not always the best solution. Sometimes the best solution is to actually just say, you know what, that's something I'm going to have to research. So I'm going to table that until I get the proper research in, and I'll come up with an answer for you the next time we meet. Something like that. I'm not saying you should just say, I'll research it, but I think it's a wise thing to be able to step back. And if you don't have a wise answer, just say that you'll research it and give people notice that you're tabling it. So what is your take on that?
That's a very honest approach. And in recent years, I've gone to that more often as just a member, because I have forgotten. I realize how much there is, and there are things I have forgotten or have been changed in the code. And this is where your older recalcitrant members may be wrong, and they find themselves then you get really older and you start to forget a little bit. And you really should have the answers. And I recognize that in myself. And I'll try not to make the mistake. I've made there used to be this thing, if you wanted to spend money as a hall association, you wanted to use 10,000, 5,000. It used to be in the code.
Hmm.
It's not there now, but it used to have a dollar amount.
Hmm.
And I said, no, you can't do it, or you can't have a lease unless it's 1 year or more. You have to get permission from the Grand Lodge. There are little nuances like that I thought were still in the code,
Hmm.
that were taken out sometime, and I was completely remiss, and I'd forgotten. But we wanted to. There were some things taken out, I think, by mistake too, because they were good for our order.
Hmm.
That we want to redraft legislation, knowing what's in the code, knowing what's in the ritual. Do the research. None of us want to stand there with egg on our face the next meeting, and we cited the code and it's actually not in there. And so.
Yeah. And that way too, whenever the next
Table it.
session rolls around and you say, I did my research and I thought it was this way and that was not correct. This is the way that it is. I think that you get a lot more respect as a Noble Grand doing that rather than just coming down on one side of it and not doing your research.
But it's not the Noble Grand that'll table it. It's going to have to come off the floor. So that Noble Grand will have to entertain a motion to table until the next meeting,
Mm-hmm.
not just table it. Don't do that.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Make
I'm
sure
sorry. You're right. You can't.
Until the next meeting,
yeah.
and table until the next meeting is a good phrase if you want to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
You want to table it indefinitely, you'll never see it again.
Right. Okay. Well, very good. So that would then take us on to the last tip that I came up with, which is tip number 10: use your district deputy grand master if you need help. So now I'm a brand new district deputy grand master, and I've had the opportunity to go and visit a couple lodges, and I've had people say, oh, you need to pay attention to this and that. And as the DDgm, my role first is to go and listen and observe. It's not to go and make decisions. So one of the things that I realized after becoming the DDgm is that it'd be really great to know, for all the lodge members to know, that the DDgm is a resource that's available. So there are, like just a couple things about it that are important, and that is, if you send a message, and email will work, by the way, in this regard. If you send a message to the DDgm, they can then do the research, make a ruling and get back to you that way. But it's great to be able to have the DDgm as a resource if that is something that, you've done the research, or there's too much contention about the issue and you'd really like to get some backing up about which way to go with a particular issue, to use the DDgm as a resource. So what is your take on that?
It's going back to something that we used to do more of. I've seen disappear quite a bit. I was a grand instructor. That and 2 cents will get you a cup of coffee. Huh? I was a grand instructor, I think 21 years ago, and we had 44. I had 44 district deputies.
Mm-hmm.
And sessions were 5 days long, not 3 days long. And I had to wear a tuxedo every morning. And I remembered all these district deputies, and we had about 5 past grand masters. Everybody was somebody, and I'm here as basically newer to Grand Lodge, and I'm trying to advise everybody how to do that. And that's when district deputies were really the direct conduit, which they still are, to the Grand Master. And that's a big advantage for a Noble Grand. If a Noble Grand has something, see, this falls into to legalities too, really civil legalities, because the noble grand is the presiding officer. So the noble grand is all. If you're a lodge like yours and you handle rentals and you're not charging enough, a market rate, or money's disappeared, or any of these things that can happen within your lodge, well, you are the presiding officer. It goes beyond Oddfellows. It goes beyond our organization. It goes
Absolutely. Yeah.
other things. So you're the presiding officer. You take on a responsibility. You may not know it, but your name goes on that 990 as the presiding officer.
As the CEO.
And it goes on there on that little information card that goes to the Secretary of State. So you are the one. And if you're not getting that type of, maybe you have a serious enough situation where you want to get it to the district deputy, and hopefully you have a good district deputy that knows to contact the Grand Master if it's serious enough. The Noble Grand should use that as a tool. That's an excellent one, a good reminder. We don't. I think our district deputy in our jurisdiction, or California, San Francisco, has become more of a ceremonial seat, which has worked well for us too. But we all know we can contact our district deputy if we need to, if we need to get a word to our Grand Master.
Yeah, I've actually this was one thing that I think was very smart. I went to go visit a lodge for the first visit, and it was requested that I deliver a talk to prospective Oddfellows. And so I do what I'm experienced at doing, and I created a really great PowerPoint presentation. And I gave a little bit of the history of Oddfellows, and I talked about why it is that people used to join, why that really isn't the case anymore. It became very obvious, but what are reasons why people join now? And I went around and I asked everybody in the room, to raise their hand. Why did you join? And what's great was I made the point that everybody would have different answers, and they sure did. Oddfellows is a much bigger mixed bag than people even realize. We're not all the same, obviously, but even more so in the reasons why we join, which is kind of surprising because the reasons used to be a lot more similar way back when, as you know. So anyways, the fact that this Noble Grand called on me to go and give a talk to prospective members is really, in hindsight, it's kind of a smart thing. He didn't necessarily want to be the guy doing a presentation. So what did he do? He called on me. So I think that was a really smart thing to do. And, I think that anybody who is a DDgm really, well, I can't say that it would be expected. I mean, we're all volunteers. It's not like we're hired because of our qualifications, but I think we should all be up for supporting our Noble Grands and our lodges, however it is that we can. If I was terrible at giving presentations, I would probably ask around, hey, who in our district is really good at this sort of thing, and invite them to come along, have them give the presentation if that's something that they're good at. So, yeah.
And the other way around, from the district deputy's perspective, district deputy should know that district, and live in that district. And, well, you know that district, and you kind of can reach out to those potential members and strengthen a particular lodge if you're familiar with that area, like you say, like I know you are. So you would have been the perfect person to come give a presentation, and you would have given that some legitimacy by being the district deputy. And now I know you're a Grand Lodge appointed officer, so you actually carried a little bit more weight with you, and people like that connection to the parent corporation. In most part, they do, and that festive type of atmosphere, that's wonderful to have someone like you give a presentation in that position. That's great. You're representing the authority.
Yeah. And, my basic thing was, hey, I told the Noble Grand, I said, hey, if they sign up, let me know, I would love to know that I made a difference somehow with those folks. I think that helping to grow our lodges and grow our district should really be everybody's job.
Yeah.
But not everybody has got as much experience as I have being out in front of crowds and talking, about something that I'm really passionate about. A lot of people, they're not that good at being able to get out there and do that. And so, I'm glad that I had that opportunity, and I'm glad that the Noble Grand asked me to. I could have just said no, not in my job
That
description.
wouldn't have been cool.
Of course, but
I would have called you a bad name if you said that. He's not a very good leader. You should accept the challenge, and you'll learn more doing it.
Oh,
You'll become a
absolutely.
better leader.
Absolutely. And, fortunately for me, I have failed enough in front of crowds to know how to do it better. So, yeah. Did I miss anything? Do you think this is a good set of tips? And by the way, I wanted to make a note about this. I decided that it would be a bad idea to say that these are rules or to suggest that these are rules. Why? We're all different. And these are tips that you can either accept them or, ignore them. It's really doesn't matter that much if you take these on completely or not. But the important thing, I think, is to at least know what they are. And once you know what they are, you can forget them, or you can take them to heart. It's really up to you if you're a new Noble Grand.
Yeah, well, you're hearing from two members. Here all I'm here for is to give you suggestions or give out suggestions, and you can take that or leave it. I don't know the way a particular lodge outside of mine works, and I'm cognizant of that. I know that enough that each lodge is different, as you just said. Each area is different. When I write something, I write knowing if I write something on a national level, I know it's geographically different. The demographics are different. The people are different. Their belief systems are different. You will see that from the Midwest to the West to the East, and we're all different. And this is what you really bring that down to the lodge level. And if your Noble Grand's that much in tune with the members, realizing the words that he or she or they are speaking, that the response, you'll know that response, and that takes a little while, a little practice. But if you know the response of your members, most of the time, your lodge meetings are going to go really well. But I made a list here, and
sure. Anything that I didn't cover? Go ahead.
Okay, number one, handle emotion. I think a Noble Grand, I wrote that as my number one point. A Noble Grand, I find most members, newer members, are hesitant because they don't know how to handle emotion. And the very simplest motion, from the point of a member standing up, I move that we spend $10 to buy 10 lottery tickets for our raffle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Easy. Second, Noble Grand would say it's been moved and seconded that we buy $10 worth of 10 raffle tickets for our attendance prizes or something like that. And the Noble Grand has to know that quickly. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. Say the right hand. All those in favor likewise, or raise your right hand. If you say those points and you're that quick and that comfortable, or you've heard the minutes of the meeting, of the last meeting, are there any corrections, amendments, or corrections or amendments are all what we ask for. You don't need a motion, okay? And we used to ask. Someone brought that up and reminded me. We used to ask that 3 times. Are there any corrections, or are there any corrections? Are there
3 times, huh?
We used to do that years ago. Now we don't do it so much with the lodge. Yeah. Somebody had moved, an associate member of our lodge, I guess they do it in their lodge, had moved to accept the minutes. And you see that happen even at Grand Master board meeting. You don't need to do that.
Right.
Just let the presiding officer ask, are there any corrections or amendments? Hearing none, the minutes stand approved as read. Bam.
Yep.
No motion. There should be no discussion on, you know,
Yeah.
on the minutes.
And I think too, that brings up another point. The Noble Grand has the authority to do things like that. So I think it's good to know when you don't need a motion for certain things. And I can't really rattle off a list of them off the top of my head, and I wouldn't want to try, but it would be a good research point to know when you don't need a motion.
Like motions at table, there's no discussion. You go immediately to a vote. There are things that the Noble Grand needs to become familiar, but it needs to feel comfortable. Just do the basic motion. It's been moved and seconded to X, Y, and Z. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, blah. All those opposed, blah. That if that Noble Grand gets just that specific little set of words, they'll feel so comfortable for the entire year. That's what they need to know, how to handle emotion quickly and efficiently and move on. And let the discussion be the long part, but the discussion will be easy because you set a time limit, as we talked about before. The second thing I have is the Noble Grand is also one who teaches, and we talked about that. So we're hoping if you become knowledgeable and you can say, well, no, we can bring in the outside conductor for this. I decided I want to bring him in, or outside guardian for this moment. But the Noble Grand needs a lead and needs a teach. So try to become. I know that's a little more difficult than I'm making it sound, but it's again knowing all those things: the code, the ritual, reading the fine print in the ritual. I already wrote know the ritual and the code. Knowing that you have to appoint your finance committee, knowing that you appoint the committees. Noble Grand, you do. Nobody else says, Mike, our committee over here said, what committee? I didn't appoint you. So the Noble Grand appoints the committee. No one else appoints the committees.
Right.
And the Noble Grand do that.
Other than the interview committee, because it's two from the Noble Grand and one from the Vice Grand. So that's a shared responsibility there. But yes,
you're right. And then here's the most important. I know I said a handle emotion is number one. Noble Grand, and this might upset some people. The Noble Grand doesn't talk.
Right.
Unless it's emotion and he gives up, he or she or they give up their seat, their chair to the right supporter or, to speak. That's it. The Noble Grand doesn't speak. And that's why they have to give up that seat to the right supporter. That's why it's in there. Because that's the only time a Noble Grand can speak on any subject. The Noble Grand only handles emotions or directs the order of business in the order they want to.
Right. And
that's it.
Yeah. I know that I've heard people say things like, oh, well, when I become Noble Grand, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And, I sometimes would hear that and say, I hate to surprise you, but, you'd be surprised, I think, at how little control you actually have over some things.
No, the Noble Grand has control.
Right. But the Noble Grand can be outvoted, though, on doing certain things. And so you may think that you would, if you want to do something that's unpopular, no, you're probably going to be overrode on that one as far as the lodge, kind of saying, no, we're not doing it that way. It's happened a couple times with me, and it's only.
A Noble Grand should just handle the business, handle the meeting,
Agreed.
Handle it. Don't get up there and discuss it, or you're going to have that 1 hour meeting turn into my gosh, I don't even want to list the lodges I've seen where the Noble Grand and I'm sitting there and I'm not going to say anything.
Noble Grands get nervous during official visits too.
Oh yeah, Bonnie mentioned something. Dude, Noble Grands sometimes
get nervous. Yeah,
nervous with visitors, official visits. So make sure if you're a district deputy or you kind of or an officer, just kind of like ease them.
Yeah.
But yeah, just Noble Grand should not elaborate or talk or be the one to lead into a motion. But they can if they give up their seat, but don't follow your own time limits. You know, don't take advantage. Maybe do you most of your talking before the meetings. It'll save yourself a lot of trouble.
Absolutely. I mean, if I'm gonna, I mean, if I would be in a position to make a motion, I would much prefer to talk with the committee in advance and kind of sort everything out and then have the committee make the motion. That's, I think, a much cleaner way of doing things because, you know, and I've actually had, you know, like my building committee, I've made a couple of recommendations, not that they were followed, but at least I got a chance to discuss what my concerns were. Like any member of the lodge has a right to talk to the building committee, talk to this committee, that committee, events, so that it's sorted out beforehand, and then the committee can make a motion. It's much, it takes less time. Things are thought out more in advance that way. It's, I think, a much cleaner way of doing things.
It sounds like we covered everything.
I think so too. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, Peter. And until next time, we'll see you on the Oddfellows Oddcast.
Okay. All right. It's been a pleasure speaking with you again. And just one thing for Noble Grands, don't let all this discourage you. It's not that difficult. Just like I said, my number one thing, just learn how to handle emotion. And you will be so confident all year long. You know, that's the number one thing.
Well,
emotion.
My number one thing is really to have a sense of humor, because nobody's perfect. People can be wrong. It happens, you know, and if you're not having a good time as Noble Grand, if you're not having fun, chances are your people aren't having fun either.
You're right. You're right. Good point.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And please subscribe down below. And we'll see you next time on the Oddfellows Oddcast.